So I'd like to think what I'm going to do for you right now is going to be so cerebral, but there's no guarantees. So I have a collection of poetry, much of which actually responds to Shannon's work as a synesthete tangentially through neuroscience, which I just recently began as my second master's. So I'm trying to incorporate the sciences into the humanities so that they aren't so estranged from each other as the university system would cleave them, and make sure to keep them compartmentalized as if it would somehow besmirch one or the other if they were to get into each other's spaces. So a lot of my work specifically tries to hybridize those two things back together. And Shannon, being a synesthete, a lot of his work fuses two different senses, vision and sound, so that there is no separation. There is no cleavage between them. They are a unity, and he experiences them simultaneously. So this first one is actually written on the inside of a clear cube inside of that mirror cube that intentionally leaves the top mirror off so that perhaps your eye, reflecting upon the interior reflections upon reflections on a poem that is reflective, might serve as the final mirror. So it may be very difficult for you to figure out where it starts by looking at it inside, because it's definitely not linearly drawn. So I'm going to give it to you in its actual order, and then if you want to try and figure it out from there for yourself, I would be more than happy for you to become the last mirror. Emergent reflexivity. I orders I inside to I itself. I said to myself, I think I see. A bow when bent is called intent, the surface wet, though solid. A clear veiled well, water turns, returns, and then discerns what's dropped therein, an other you. Whose black pit is this ringed round in blue like oiled aquamarine? What is there between us two? It moves as I do, sees what I think, I believe. The sight of me impregnating the mind receives me into you. Disorder? What's reversed? I circle back, two teardrop points conjoin, a line of sight crossed, with light embossed, the inversion adroit, though untrue. Occipital seated serpentine, a bow ties together what orbits between, minds the gap into that which is drawn up, around, and through. Where we meet is a fork with 2 feet. A branching tree is potentiality that before we never knew. I am an other when I possesses you. So this one I wrote to Shannon, for Shannon, of Shannon. And it was, the form of it was quasi-inspired by the notion of the Mobius strip. So perhaps you'll catch a little bit of that going on in here, but it's one that there's an oral poem and there's a written poem. Almost everything I write, there's at least 2 different sides. So it's something you might actually have to look at to see how it is somehow all one side, but then again, maybe not. Collected perception, synesthete. Than itself containing the older with organic meaning, closer to the shamanic in its orders, a system born with blood pulse pattern itself kinetic. Nothing's lost to friction when banging against thin membrane like a djembe. What sees can recognize what radiates, what crawls out from where sound originates. A hollow trunk stretched round with skin learns to sense pressure, inspiration. The diaphragm swells like a paper bag blown into from without. The spirit respired becomes audible breath, life, moves through body like wind, passing through porous trees. The song calibrates, assembles a collection to mind, syncopate with attractive dimensions, tat together tone, intention, intensity, tying individual threads together, densely twisted singularity into a fine diaphanous population of interactivity and orchestrated light that lifts resonant bodies, rising higher and higher as if air balloons, the motion inherently singing life as heat, wind, and foresight. The body holds its lantern in spite of mute darkness, its complex harmonics being architectonic, turning the lace of lightning into building material, where what we are already feels how to balance opposing forces, tension and release. What we hear is what we see, a transcribing of love, loss, attraction, apathy, well-intentioned tragedy. Our performance is fluid, senses perpetually flooded, perception is sound, eternity can see. The noise harmonically composed of 4 fundamental forces as dimensions of a note the eye sees by vibrating perpetually, and the RK is this explosion of light that interprets the God tone, open-mouthed, full of incomprehensible sound from out of the black hole throat existence cries her voice, constellation choirs, nests of rings, singing deep lullabies, the becoming ever more complex than itself containing, So this one is Music of the Spheres. We know that with the cube, thanks to the Metatron representation that we have on the wall, that each of the points implies a circle and a triangle matrix or lattice. My math and my science are still shaky at this point. So this poem is to the sphere side of the Metatron cube. Music of the Spheres. Rings of rhythm radiate like the turning gyre, widening and widening. Ich lebe mein Leben in wachsenden Ringen, alle Zeit und Sein. Waves from epicenters expanding, modulating, evolving like interest, interesting. Patterns are probabilistic, expansion of definition, so everything is becoming from within. Shadows loud as respiration, their sound is spirit rising. Puddles evaporate around petals that pulse beneath the water, syncopating with submolecular flux. A river pouring into from out of itself, Ouroboros drawn in by gravitational forces to centripetal recycling, reconceiving of itself. Tree branches spread like fractal dendritic ends, mimetic diegesis, soldering between stained glass. Neural extensions through sky muscle tissues, investing the breath of our breath back in us. The bronchioles stimulated, Urzeit inspiring, unsere musikalische ewige Wiederkunft. Resonance tats together the sinews of sound, binding matter and mattering, in cymatic bodies, dancers, bubbling springs, neuronal bodies like Moravian star lanterns, exciting themselves into dawning. Sonic mandalas of elemental geometry, iteration, beautiful ornamentation, nesting dolls. We are all evolved from as many nucleotides as elements. Promethean fire, a vesicle in oxygenated water, a lantern within musical note. Utterance, foregoing word, after sense, phonemes fly like birds between fingertips, receptive limbs through every brain, reach, affect, disseminate through, sensual, the warm womb space encapsulates both retina and cochlea, densely twisted conch hybridized with the wave. Every instrumental being, each to each they sing to me, we all play ourselves. The next two I wrote for Shannon sort of on accident. I dreamt them, and it was the first time I have ever dreamt in language. Pure language, no image, which is strange because it was for Shannon, which is image and sound. No words, no dialogue. You don't see any actual verbiage anywhere. But in conceiving of the relationship of what I do to his form of image and sound, the commonalities between point and line and perspective and shape, the experience, the sensation, apparently seeded my brain enough that in sleep I wrote a poem for him. I wrote two. And I woke up and I scribbled them down as quickly as humanly possible and somehow managed to get them out in time to have them fully formed as if Athena cloven from my head. Fully formed, clad in armor. I don't know that they're as wise as Athena would be, but one can hope. So the first is alpha begetting. It's fairly short. Alpha begetting. Complete in its own grammar, its point, its line, its end until interrupted. Broken in two, each limb spread out by an angle, a root, the caret interjects new meaning. Prime value become pregnant, the intersection spins three paths out of one, partial, one whole bent together, bodying forth new form, direction, from the stroke of but one extra-dimensional plume. That was the poetic side of it, and now to the Shannon side of it. This one is called Dream Weaving. An interior Kreuzweg turns six conjoined points out as in time. Honeycomb tension, self-taught. Each intersection membrane potential radiates outward, potentiating, in and expires radial. Emanation of expressivity grows antennae, extends extensions. Every possible what could be, circumscribed by nothing, rings around them. Some selected, carved into new dimensional realities as obtuse angles, the stuff of diamonds, triangles, fanned out in star symmetry, from one dense droplet with no name, just lines eternal, a web, a skin, a sound bubble, an eye flung open, become crystalline, lights, certain faces now defined, born out of the dark, drawn by it. Form iterated from bound pairs, shades between opposites, reflex mirrors it into itself, gives body to breath, expires. It all echoes, bears lattices of everything, dreams everything else. So the last one that I will do for you goes to the auditory sensory system and plays a lot of puns with what's going on there, but makes the neuroscience just a little bit more beautiful because sometimes the language of science isn't always quite aesthetically pleasing. So this is called Visions Audible, but there will be little moments in there that if something sounds like it doesn't quite fit, I promise it really does. The metaphors are actually really close to some of the things that I've been studying. Or at least I hope they are. Visions audible. Potential. Stretch sensitive. Voices heard when realized as voices are no more sound than a foot against metric wall. But you are the boundary, bound beyond where is nothing. Push too hard and support collapses, the fall, vertigo will twists horizons. Stand upon your hands until digits incline up the side of misinformation, play gravity, posturing against the shift. You look down, but really across the incline, inclining, a tendency to show your wrath. Fear as force climbs back down, while young, agile children back up their hands despite floors, walls, conventions, their head ever closer to the ground, every chance they get. Turned axes, displacing doctrines, playtime over, the handstand collapses, pressure waves, dances, laughter, the expression of catabasis. Fall, folly rebound. So, thank you.